Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you. Good to be here. Hi, Jose.
Hey, and so for today, I think it's a good point or a good starting point to start with your background, because as I understand, you came from quite a different background from where you are at now and found a real interesting way of connecting the different threads that you've come across.
Sure, sounds great. Um, so I call myself an architect of consciousness. Um, and that started because I started working in architecture offices when I was only 16 and a half. And I worked in that field and then went to formal university and graduated with a degree in architecture. But in that process, um, I did things like go to the library, which I never had really done too much. And I read the work of kind of the famous architects, Frank Lloyd Wright and Le Corbusier and Walter Gropius and all these people who, in large part, were also fairly philosophical, and they had their ideal, things that they thought about in the world. And architecture, in large part, is a product of how people think. And as I got into architectural design more and more, it was great to do a good building design. But the way my brain works, I thought, well, this is no good. I have this gem of a beautiful building, but the environment it's in is like a terrible urban design. So I had to go into and took some graduate courses in urban design. And then my brain was like, well, that's no good because when I'm looking at the building design and the urban design, that all seems to come from how people think. So I really need to get into designing how people think. And as I graduated from college and got recruited into a prestigious firm as a designer, I then found myself really frustrated that people weren't doing things in what I thought were a logical, intelligent way. And I really wanted to understand why. And so that set me off on this search of how the world worked.
Interesting.
And in architecture education, you have to take a full year of art and architectural history, and you basically learned and saw slides, pictures, images of everything from the Bushmen and the Aborigines of Australia to modern architecture. And
Wow.
so you got a survey of everybody, all human art and architectural expression. And I was lucky I had a photographic memory, so I had that pretty accessible in my brain. And after a while, I saw a pattern. And that pattern was essentially the expression of the development of what you can call the ego and the self. And we're born without an ego. And an ego you could kind of define really formally as the idea of the self. Your brain, where our brains are basically born blank, right? We have no images of the world within
Mm-hmm.
it. And as our eyes develop and we can see a little better, we go from fuzzy sight to black and white sight to color sight and clear sight. Eventually, we start feeling things, and our little sensory apparatus of our body starts cataloging information, like a good librarian starts filling the library, right? And that library is kind of our ego. And per you could call it the Matrix movies, you start creating a alternate world in the mind. And the reality is that there's the real world that we touch and feel every day, the ground, the sky, the air, and then there's the idea or the model, the mental models in our head of what the world is. And that includes the mental model of ourselves.
Right, right.
And so there you are, developing from birth to death. And there's, if you look at the work of standard psychologists like Piaget and Erickson and others, it's very clear to everybody in the human race that the human being goes through different developmental stages.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw those developmental stages as the root cause of the expressions in the art and architectural of all human cultures throughout history.
Wow.
And in each developmental stage, you have a different development level of brain neurons and brain function, as well as perception of ego and the self in relationship to everything else. And really, the art and the architecture is, and urban designs and everything is driven by that. Because in each developmental stage, you get what you can call a different worldview and a different set of value structures and belief systems that are generated by that worldview.
Absolutely.
It's like when you're born with pink glasses, and everything you see is pink. And then when you turn somewhere between 6 months and 3 years of age, oh, and by the way, the glasses are fuzzy and they're the wrong magnification or the wrong clarity. So they're, instead of, 0, because your eyes are perfect, they're +6. So everything's fuzzy. If you're a person that wears glasses, you know what that would mean.
Yes,
and eventually those glasses, as you change them, they get clearer and different colors.
You finally get the glasses for your specific eyes.
Yeah. And so one of the things every human being in the world should know is that between the ages of 6 months and 3 years of age, every human organism has a first perception of separateness. They go, oh, this is me and this is mommy or blanket or bottle or whatever it is. And the most important thing about that is if that awareness, that perception occurs in a moment where you feel safe and happy, or if it occurs in a moment where you feel fearful, stressed, anxious, and scared. Okay, so what does that do? Well, guess what? You're an apparatus collecting data. So what are you going to imprint on your neural net?
Either danger or safety.
The environment, your universe, is happy and fun and safe, or scary, threatening, and confusing.
Mm-hmm.
So what if that's your first neural impression that gets most deeply etched, because emotions are essentially energy in motion.
Mm-hmm.
And the stronger the emotion, the stronger the etching in the neural system. And the deeper, more ingrained it gets. And if it's one of the first etchings in your tablet, it's kind of a big deal.
It's hardwired.
It gets very hardwired. And so that's why I say it's important that all human beings understand that, because you really, if you're, it doesn't matter if you're a janitor or the president of the United States or any country or any corporation, your operating system, your firmware, if you're a computer programmer, is based on that etching, right? That's your firmware. Safe or scary, unsafe, right? And it starts, you're laying out what your value structure and your belief systems are. So then the second big thing that all human beings should know is between the ages of 7 and 11 years of age, every human being switches from a primarily kinesthetic feeling of the world,
the touching of things.
Yeah. You sense it, you feel it. That's why children and dogs are generally agreed to be better judges of character because they're feeling it. And that's, in a way, harder to fake and more direct way of knowing.
The movement of the muscles is a fact. You can't change it.
Yeah, and the energy that somebody puts out based on their muscle state and their intentions and all that, it comes across really clearly to a being that can read energy and feel energy without interruption. And so anyway, between the age of 7 and 11, our human organism apparatus switches to a cognitive visual emphasis or hierarchy of perceiving the world. And from that, also the brain structure gets to a point where the brain starts to think more in the way of the scientific method, and the magical mind starts to die, and we get the more rational, linear, binary, logical thinking brain in that early beginning of adolescence, which develops on up to the age of 23, 25 in men, when the frontal lobes fully grow out. So this whole developmental stage process is very much grounded in our human species biology, right? It's not something that somebody just philosophically made up. It's very much driven by how our brain and everything develops. And so, yeah, the third big thing is understanding what the frontal lobes do and how they develop and give us really the capacity. And what I say in this book that I have coming up that I'm finishing based on this original paper I did, and for the audience who wants to know, the paper was called The Fractal Nature of Consciousness, the Evolution of the Global Human and the Driving Forces of History. And that was the first time I codified my full understanding of what drives all human behavior throughout history. It determines the rise and fall of empires, the rise and fall of popular ideas, products, philosophies, our concepts of math, science, God, dance, literature, everything. And I mean everything.
Everything can be traced back to a mathematical formula then?
In a way. And there's a formula that I have in my paper, which is developmental state plus environmental conditions equals events.
It goes back to your previous point that if you come from a happy background, you might be naturally more inclined to be an optimist because I saw it being good, I expect good things to happen. But if you come from a difficult background, you will be more receptive to be negativist. You will be more receptive to expect the worst out of people. Maybe you might strain your future relationships.
Yeah, a really great example I like is, let's say, the development of the German personality and language. And etymology is a really great way to see what sort of consciousness and worldview a culture or a person is running in their little computer
firmware.
in their firmware and their operating system. Whether they're running Windows or DOS or something else. Anyway, so Germany is generally known for having a harsh climate and pretty severe winters. Well, somebody who's raised in that environment, it seems kind of reasonable that they would get very focused on doing things on time.
Of course.
Because if you don't, like plant the seeds on time, harvest on time, get your shelter built on time, you're going to die.
Very harsh consequences.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. And then another really big determinant of human behavior, value structures, etc., is population density. And if anybody wants to do research on that, there's cultural anthropologists and psychologists have done many studies on different types of mammals, rats, mice, other things, in X amount of density, X amount of mice per square foot, more or less, has a huge impact on behavior patterns.
Can you give a few examples?
Sure. You get an increasing amount of homosexuality developing in the animals in the higher densities. For example,
is it because of the natural statistics of a bell curve distribution?
No, it doesn't.
No?
It's not that. It's just you start getting a higher percentage of homosexual orientation as the population density increases. And if you think about it from a natural, scientific, logical point of view, it makes total sense, because what is nature always wanting to do?
Reproduce.
Create a balanced ecosystem.
Okay.
If you have too much population density, guess what it wants to do? Not procreate as much.
Scarcity of resources, self-preservation, balance ultimately.
Yeah. So in one sense, you could say, like, in one aspect of the development of homosexuality, as an example, it's just nature balancing itself. There's no to have a value structure about it, or thinking of it as sinful or against God or all these other things is kind of beside the point.
It's literally natural for it to occur.
Literally. And I mean, think about the history of it. Homosexuality became really strong in the high population density areas of the world throughout history, whether it was Athens in Greece or Berlin in Germany or San Francisco and New York City, right? It
Back to
wasn't
that
as high,
balance.
it wasn't as high a percentage of population in other areas. Sure, it could exist. The Hopi Indians, you'd get, nature would do things like create a hermaphrodite, a human being born with both sexual organs. And for the Hopis, for whatever interesting reason, they considered that to be a especially gifted human being.
Because it connected both personas.
Well, for the Hopi culture, the twins is like one of the highest symbols of metaphorical meaning and importance. And the twins are like the masculine and the feminine. And so, in my understanding of the development of consciousness in the world, a couple of things came out that were really important. One is understanding the influence on the operating system based on how much masculine or feminine is running in a person or a culture as a whole, and how much left or right brain is running in a person.
Rational versus emotional.
Or you could say, and there's some really great studies. There was a neuroscientist. She had a stroke herself, and in her stroke episode, she had and she has a TED talk. Taylor Boltz, or I forget her name. She noticed that when the blood supply was in her right brain, she became extraordinarily happy and present in the moment
During the
stroke. And then the blood supply would switch to the left brain more. And then she was like, "Oh, I've got to dial the ambulance, and the phone number is this, and I've got to save my life right away." And it was completely focused on solving the problem and being efficient. And then the blood supply would switch, and she would forget completely what she was doing and go, "Oh, I'm so happy, and the moment is so perfect."
That's the ultimate human experiment.
Oh, it was fantastic. And there's an Oxford professor who wrote a great book called The Master and Its Emissary, which is his very, very detailed explanation of the relationship between the right and the left brain. The right brain he calls the master, and the emissary being the left brain. And he describes kind of the same problem that she saw, was that the left brain is really the tool, and the right brain is really meant to be the boss, because its skill set is seeing the big picture and tying things together, whereas the ego breaks them down, does the reductionistic science, and figures out all the parts and how to work with them. So that's like I said, when you're looking at the development of the human being and all cultures and all societies throughout history and time, you really want to understand the developmental stage we're in, and whether we're running female or masculine, and right or left brain, and the environmental impact and influence on the individual. And that results in, if you become, in politics, a policy wonk is the term that they call it, or something else, for example. Also, in my way of looking at the world, the West, and here's a really, really big thing when you learn and understand all this stuff, all of the cultures in the world represent different memories that are alive of the developmental stages of the human race. So, for example, the Aboriginal peoples represent the child state, infancy, before the perception of separateness.
Right.
So one of the things they do as Aborigines is they are known for sitting in dream time.
Dream time?
Dream time. It's essentially they're just sitting there in a meditative state, feeling 100% completely connected with existence, which if you're religious, you'd say with God, maybe. But they're just like vegging out. But like a modern Western person would go, what the hell are they wasting their time doing here? Different developmental stage. So the misconnection or the miscommunication, the misunderstanding is entirely a developmental stage problem. The Aboriginal people are sitting there completely happy being one with their mother, for example, completely in bliss. They don't want to wear shoes. They don't have architecture. They don't want to build a giant skyscraper or anything like that, because their primary value structure, because their developmental stage says they are one with everything.
They sit there being one with nature.
They want to be one with everything. And they're good. And that's pretty successful sort of cultural development and strategy, because you follow all the rules of nature, which over millions of years developed the human organism, which can survive in that balanced natural ecosystem. So they've been around for 40,000 years, right? Meanwhile, America, the modern West, we worry about extinction level events of nuclear war and other things. They didn't have to worry about that. And so looking through this same way of understanding the world and frameworks of existence, the modern West and the United States especially is what I call the living expression of high adolescence in the human species. And so real fantastic examples that reinforce that is that in the 80s, the media called it the me decade.
Me decade?
Yes. If you look at Time magazines or other big media outlets, they called the 80s the me decade. It was all about me. And it was the highlighting of the self. And, you know, most everybody would understand that happens really strongly in high school.
Yes.
And American politics, most people would understand, is like a giant popularity contest of who's going to be prom queen.
Yep.
There's not a really good, and so it's very emotional rather than rational based on a lot of other sort of value structures. And then I was going into another way of looking at the world of masculine and feminine. China and the Asian countries are essentially the feminine expression of the human species, and the West is essentially the masculine expression of the human species.
In the sense of one being the hunter and the other the preservation?
Well, look at the way that the cultures have developed over the centuries. One of the highlights of Chinese culture is they got very into education and the development of a very formal bureaucracy following Confucianism, etc. And they developed before the West.
Yes.
They developed writing, gunpowder, all of these great inventions before the West. Well, who generally develops sooner? The female.
Yep.
Develops before the male. The
Biologically,
the
that's part of it.
The frontal lobes of the female develop before the male. Between 20, 21, 22, the frontal lobes fully grow out in the female, the male not till 23, 25 years of age.
3-4 years before.
Right. So again, that's nature doing its thing. It understands the human organism is dependent upon procreation. So the one, responsible for procreation better develop fast. That's the female. Yeah. So then the males, they took gunpowder and they said, hey, let's do guns and cannons. And we're going to go out and dominate people and do colonialism. Those are all very masculine ways of doing things, right? The Chinese way of doing things is very much more hidden, indirect. Let's give people gifts and develop a relationship. And God, these other people are nuts. And so we're just going to stick to our knitting and stay home and be an agrarian society. We're not going to refine things and develop mechanisms and machines and power structures like the West did, which eventually the West came and sort of raped the East by going up the Yangtze River in 1813 with their cannons and forcing the Chinese to buy the opium that the West was creating in the Opium Wars of the 1830s or whenever that was, right? Very masculine, feminine sort of dynamics. And the language of the Chinese or Asian cultures is symbolic, which is
Yes.
much more how the female brain works. The male brain much more works in a linear, binary, logical way. And so the alphabet is much more the construction of a male-dominated brain structure.
Yeah, the
So those
specific
are,
letters, while the glyphs in, for example, Japanese carry different meanings depending on the
yeah,
association or even a simple stroke of the glyph.
yeah,
It's a very
exactly.
interesting way of looking at it.
So that helps if you understand the different cultures that way. And yeah, if you're a politician, if you're a negotiator, if you're just trying to understand each other. And so those are the main things you look at. And then if you look at all the cultures in human history and you then apply to history and all the things we remember about history, most everybody goes to school and we were forced to memorize a bunch of facts like Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, right? And Rene Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And, all these other things. And they're just kind of a bunch of like unconnected facts, and we don't even know why we're remembering them. Right?
Unfortunately.
Something the culture and the educators have decided are important and we should remember them. Well, guess what? What's really fascinating, if you look at an overlay on you can look at 40,000 years of human history, and you can write down all the different things that were going on, like in year, 20,000 BC, 10,000 BC, 5,000 BC, age of Christ, 1000 AD, 2000 AD, and you write down the cultures and what they were doing and what kind of literature they had, what their concept of God was, what their type of science they had, all those things, everything a culture does. If you look at those and then you lay the developmental stages on them, you see that they very much match. And everything switches in unison, like the concepts of science, math, God, the things written about in literature, the family structures, the way that people live, whether they're in little tribes, big tribes, a feudal lord system with a castle and a king and a hierarchy and all those things, they all switch in unison.
It's really interesting.
And so I called my paper The Fractal Nature of Consciousness because a key characteristic of fractal science is called self-similarity.
Self-similarity.
That means everything is of the same flavor, the same scent. Everything has the same sort of character. Like, oh, the way that person dresses is self-similar. Everything matches that person's personality.
Right.
Like it's very, loud, artistic, and expressive. Oh, that matches Judy, or that matches John, or whoever. Yeah, that's them for sure. And sometimes they'll do something way off, and you go, well, that doesn't fit. And it's the same thing with cultures. The culture does this, right? And there's a great movie called oh gosh, I forgot the name of it already. The Gods Must Be Crazy.
Gods Must Be Crazy.
Really great movie. You can get away with watching the first 5 or 10 minutes, and you see the point of the film. It starts by basically kind of like a cultural anthropologist is studying Bushmen of the Kalahari in Africa, and their beautiful, simple life in their little tribe. The father, the mother, the uncle, the aunt, the kids living in a little thing they built with twigs, and they're living off the land, and the relationship they have with the animals that they kill and to eat and survive. And then somebody drops a Coke bottle out of an airplane, and somebody in the tribe finds this Coke bottle. And I don't know if you know a Coca-Cola bottle, but they're pretty hard.
Yes.
And so anyway, that introduces something very not self-similar.
Almost like a different fractal introduced into that fractal.
Completely. And so it's a great name. It's like The Gods Must Be Crazy. It's the name of the film, because why did the gods give us this bottle? And you can see how this bottle ends up sort of destroying their society, because there's only one bottle and they start fighting over it because, you know, they all want to use it as a tool at different times. Anyway, that's an example of two worlds that are not self-similar coming together, and how to deal with that, and suddenly how it creates a problem.
That's a really interesting approach because it's, excuse me. So if you think, for example, science or the natural world, physics, as its own fractal, before we knew gravity was a thing,
Yeah.
it was the Coke bottle. Like, why is the apple falling from the tree?
Yes.
God knows why.
Exactly.
But then you connect the two fractals.
Yeah.
And our collective universe expands into a completely different realm of thinking, because, oh, there's this thing called physics, there's this thing called gravity, and from gravity you spawn a multitude of different new fractals to explain that side of physics and potentially other research fields that can come off of it. It's fractal. It replicates infinitesimally.
Yeah, so there was a super important book that was written in 1962. It was called something like the Structure of Scientific Revolutions by, I think, Thomas Kuhn. And it was considered the one or two most important books in science of the 20th century.
Wow.
Yeah, kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's where the term paradigm came from and became popular. And it's most often misused, because paradigm essentially means the preeminent or best example of a type of thinking. It's like the model. So you can have a model of electromechanics, or a model of chemistry, or, you know, a model of whatever it is, right? And that's what everybody agrees is the best representation of this field of thinking or fashion or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, everybody decided to take it as more of you know, a time in history or a way of doing things in general, when it really means just a preeminent example. So to say we're having a paradigm, to say we're having a paradigm shift, it's not really accurate. Yeah, you can have a paradigm shift from one, like classical physics, to quantum physics, and you get a whole different collection of paradigm sort of examples and results of experiments, and say, oh yeah, this is absolutely the way this works. And then you get quantum physics and you're like, oh, that puts everything into question. Oh wait, this is the way things work. Right? Change your paradigm. And those are really different changes of developmental stages.
It's a more mature approach, a more mature stage.
Yeah, and so, for example, in childhood, it's kind of known for people that have had, you know, been parents and had children. A lot of kids will have their imaginary friend.
All right.
And or they can read people and energy and maybe have psychic sort of insights, and then that goes away as they get older. And you, gosh, why is that? Well, if you do neuroscience and neurobiology and neurofeedback, you find out really interesting things. Like if you hook up a bunch of sensors to people's brains, you find out that up till the age of 7 to 11, a child is in a really high level of theta brainwaves.
Can you give just like a one-liner of that brainwaves?
Sure. And this is like after a few decades of research, the scientists discovered, okay, there's 5 brainwaves. You got delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. What's most useful and interesting for everybody to know about those are different frequencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Delta, they've discovered or kind of agreed that it kind of represents the unconscious. Theta represents the subconscious. Alpha represents a bridge between theta and beta, the conscious, which adults, generally their brains are full of a lot of beta brainwaves.
Always impulses, inputs to process.
Well, that's the one that's like the trains are on time. 1 + 1 is 2. I got to solve the problem, be on time, get my to-do list done. Right?
Gotcha.
Alpha, if somebody in there, and everybody's different, and our brains are like different territories, they got the same structure, but like a radio, and some people like Sir Mortimer J. Adler and other kind of known philosophers and researchers and people that think a lot, they go, oh, the brain is really just like a crystal in a radio tuning into different things. And so each human being is kind of its own radio, tuning into different radio stations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why each person is their own expression that gets reality or brings in a different aspect of conscious awareness or invention or creation. Like, Newton was tuned into one radio station and Tesla was tuned into a different radio station.
Mm-hmm.
So they came up with different stuff.
Thank
right?
God.
Henry Ford, another one, Albert Einstein, another one, and likewise. And so brain research is you can put all these
The
sensors on your brain and they can actually do a map and go, oh, wow, there's a whole bunch of theta going on or delta or whatever. And one of the things they discovered is, and why this idea of subconscious, unconscious, bridge consciousness came up as a theory was originally it was thought that delta brainwaves were only high level when people were in deep REM sleep.
So during the night.
Yeah, you're in deep REM sleep, your eyelids are, your eyes are moving, all that stuff is going on. Well, guess what? They started hooking people up that they had high delta brainwave levels when they were awake. And that kind of blew their model. They're like, okay, what the hell's going on? Get back to the drawing board. Now, what the hell does this mean? Anyway, they eventually figured out those people had high psychic ability. and so after a while, and one guy, he was early researcher. He was flown to Japan and India, and he was able to hook up the brains of Zen Roshis and yogis and did brain maps of them. And wow, there was a really different amount of levels of theta and delta in those people in their deep meditation than a regular, businessman in New York City, for example, or a doctor in San Francisco. Very different brain maps. And that gave them a whole lot of insight on how humans work and brain function and how you're interpreting the world and all that sort of thing. So they ended up coming up with brain trainings to optimize human behavior to get the highest amount of alpha, because alpha acts as the bridge and it brings the subconscious and the unconscious into the conscious world. And like Thomas Edison intuitively figured this out, he would take naps regularly and hold metal balls in his hands. So as soon as he fell asleep, and he'd lie down holding these metal balls, and as soon as he fell asleep, well, his hands would let go of the balls and they'd fall down and he'd wake up. So what he was doing is it was his system of getting his brain to be in a high theta and delta brainwave state so that inventive ideas would come to him more commonly, more regularly.
Wow.
And most people don't know this, that Tesla studied yoga with a yogi guru from India and was really into the deep meditational brainwave state. So they were bringing stuff into the world that most people could not access because their brainwave patterns wouldn't tune into that.
There's no bridge in there.
No, so it's really, really useful. And people that are into this and they want to learn more about this, a guy named, oh gosh, I forgot his name, Jose something. He figured this out. He was a radio technician in the Army, and he had like 9 kids, and he wanted to, and they weren't doing well in school. And so he wanted to find a way to help them do better in school. And so he wanted to reduce noise and increase signal strength.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was thinking like a radio operator. Anyway, he eventually came up with a brain training method. And as he did that, his kids started to do really good at school when he trained their brains in a certain way. And one of his younger kids, he'd read her stories. And like like literature, even, I don't know, like Moby Dick or something. And she would like say the words he was about to read before he read them. And like you imagine, he kind of freaked out. He's like, I was just about to say that. How did you know that? Anyway, he eventually figured out, same thing as these neurofeedback researchers, this brain training had developed a high level of psychic ability in his child. And so psychic ability was noticed and learned to be trainable.
Is that at all related to observational skills?
Oh, absolutely. Because, yeah, I mean, if you have, it's like, it's really, and this is kind of the thing that you see displayed in movies like Star Wars and Darth Vader and Yoda, right? They were trained in this, it's Jose Silva and his brain training method. They were Darth Vader and Yoda, first of all, were genetically predisposed to have higher psychic capacity as children, and then they developed it more, and they became, Jedi Knights. So if you want to be more like a Jedi Knight, do like Jose Silva brain training or other types of brain training, and you will develop these capacities. And that's what they do when you become a really focused yogic, guru, yogi, or Zen master and stuff like that. And it's kind of well known that you can do this. And so he would have a lot of really successful, ambitious business people come to do his brain training because it would increase their ability to pick stocks well, to make better decisions, to win and be more successful.
Is, online, you will hear a lot of advice of, if you're stuck mentally, go for a walk.
Yeah.
Is going for a walk to clear out your ideas essentially a hack to make
It'll
that more
100%,
intense?
yes, because breathing, you're going to laugh about this connection. So I developed my book and my paper, or my paper first, and this theory of everything, how everything works. And it works as a really good market analysis tool. If you're a business person, you analyze the market, right? So I analyze the market in terms of the developmental stages of the people in the world. And because everybody changes from kinesthetic feeling to visual cognitive way of perceiving the world, I figured, oh, there's going to be a real problem with human beings being out of their bodies and hurting their bodies because they're not paying attention to how they feel. All that matters is how they think and what they see. So I ended up developing a company making ergonomic chairs because I understood that people were going to be so focused on thinking and seeing things, they were going to destroy their bodies. And I was in Silicon Valley at the time with, 100,000 computer people all over the place. And sure enough, they were getting repetitive strain injuries, carpal tunnel injuries, all this stuff, hurting their necks and their backs, getting migraines, because they were sitting in the most stupid, dangerous, damaging ways possible.
I'm laughing because I'm one of those idiots.
Well, it's a developmental stage problem. Your worldview, and oh my God, this is like the best example. There's a book called The Prince by Machiavelli.
Mm-hmm.
In one of my favorite books called Taken In. Yeah, it's an analysis of American culture and society in terms of politics and electing Ronald Reagan or other politicians, and why and how people would think in a way that would give that result. So a very, really good study of child rearing patterns in human cultures, and another really big determinant of a culture or society and what framework and worldview people have comes from the child rearing pattern of a culture.
Really?
Completely. And there's huge cultural anthropological studies that show this very clearly. So, for example, in India, cultural anthropologists noticed that the mothers would hold the child constantly, but they wouldn't give it much attention to its emotions. So that resulted in kind of body awareness, but a very low development and perception of a self. So it kind of matches that you develop Buddhism with a concept, the development of no self, out of that kind of a culture. And in another culture, like a kibbutz in Israel, in the Jewish culture, they noticed that the people were really good at living in and working in a community, but they were very, very low in their capacity for entrepreneurial thinking and behavior. And the West, in the way they develop the West, it really develops the self and entrepreneurial thinking in the way they do child rearing and stuff like that. So that's another really huge thing. And I'm sorry I took that little detour.
Oh no, it was fantastic.
I forgot your question.
The question was, I think it was perfect, because the question was around essentially a quick hack to get that bridge more intense between the conscious and the subconscious.
Yeah, so you talked about going for a walk, for example. And I went into all that because breathing and how you breathe really affects your brainwaves.
Because you get more oxygen. You can
and so in modern society in the West, the high-performing Silicon Valley go-go, we're going to conquer the world people, there's a big understanding of the importance of the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system. And you can reduce cortisol levels.
So stress, in other words.
De-stress yourself, improve the functioning of your body, which improves the alpha brainwave levels in your brain at the same time. And it comes from slowly breathing in 3 or 4 seconds, holding your breath 3 or 4 seconds, and slowly breathing out for 3 or 4 seconds. And you do that when you're walking.
You don't even think about it. It's literally part of the machine.
You also do it when you're smoking. Which is one of the reasons people feel better when they're smoking. It's not so much the smoke, but that breathing pattern really goes, oh, I feel better now.
I wonder if then, and this might be a stretch, but I'm curious about your opinion of the increase of smoking in business contexts.
Say more. Why it was increased, or what?
So, for example, here in Portugal, I've noticed that pattern of, people in their 20s, primarily. That was my context.
Yeah.
More of them becoming smokers, and those smokers smoking more frequently. So, in other words, taking more frequent smoke breaks throughout the day, especially in high stress, high intensity environments.
Sure. Oh yeah, absolutely. I make the joke that skiing is Nordic meditation. Surfing is beach people's meditation. Smoking is city dwellers' meditation. And those are different human adaptations to self-regulate their brain state.
Because the price is delayed, so you don't notice that you might have health implications later.
Oh, it absolutely has big health implications later. Being present in the moment, de-stressing, being in a more parasympathetic nervous system state. The body only heals, if you're a medical doctor, you'd understand this. The body only heals itself when it's in a parasympathetic nervous system state.
Ready to do the regenerative process as it goes.
Yeah, all of that. So if you're stressed out, you're in a sympathetic nervous system state, you're freaking out, you're nervous, you're doing all your stuff you're doing. So your body wants to regulate and get back to relaxed. And yeah, of course, nicotine has certain aspects to it. There's more recent research that shows that nicotine has actually a lot of interestingly beneficial health properties. So you can understand why the Native American Indians, where nicotine smoking actually originated from, was used in a ritualary sense.
Part of maintenance.
Yeah, and so this goes back to the developmental stages and the stronger and stronger development of the ego and egoic self, and probably the biggest thing that the human race needs to understand. both for individual and collective success and survival. And every culture in every developmental stage has developed different survival strategies based on this developmental stage that they're in. And so, as I said in the beginning, we're born without an egoic sense of self.
A blank canvas.
It's like an original unity consciousness. You're one with everything. You have no concept of being separate from anybody else. And eventually, as you age, that develops stronger and stronger and stronger. And adolescence, that gets to be its highest, most developed form. And the really, really important detail, and I'm going to offer you and your listeners, there's a chart that I call the most important chart in the world. And it's showing the developmental stage and the relationship between the ego and the self in high adolescence, and a big canyon. And on the other side of that is the early mature self and the relationship between the ego and the self. And if we don't do that transition well, every single empire in the course of history has failed. So, I don't know, you might want to know about this. Just maybe it might be beneficial for your survival strategy.
Might be good to know.
Whether you're a leader of a major country or corporation, or an individual taking care of your family or just yourself, this is a really good thing to know. And so here it is. In high adolescence, the ego and the brain are so strong and so developed that if you've been subjected to certain levels and types of trauma, you can basically retreat into the egoic concept of self and reality.
Can you elaborate a bit on the egoic sense?
Yeah, you have a map of reality in your head. You believe X, Y, Z about everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's the world. But that's your own belief in your head.
Right, your projection.
Everybody else has a different one. You might have friends that have similar ones, but everybody, in a sense, has their own world in their head.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the different culture they were raised in, the different child rearing patterns, whether they were raised more on masculine or feminine values with right-brained or left-brained people that were farmers or business people, etc., etc. And that develops in your brain as your egoic model representation of yourself and the world as you perceive it. So with trauma, trauma triggers what I call the ground fault interrupt switch in the human body. I don't know if you know much about electricity, but in architecture, you design buildings and you got to put electrical systems with switches and lights and plugs and all that, right? Well, in the bathroom, you put in a type of plug that if the plug gets wet, it shuts off the switch.
Right.
It stops the circuit. So because with water, there's no cutoff to the amount of electricity that's flowing through, and it can kill you. Right? So we don't want that.
No.
So similarly, in trauma, what happens is suddenly the experience is emotionally so overwhelming to the human organism that it switches off like a ground fault interrupt switch. It's like, too scary, too much, I'm going to shut off. And so it shuts off feeling and the nervous system to survive the trauma.
Because survival is the top priority.
Exactly. It's a way to survive. The problem is it cuts you off from a really important part of yourself. And in fact, you can't develop as a balanced, healthy human being without that feeling sense. And how big of a deal this is, empathy which gives you the ability to understand and feel another person, and therefore have compassion for them, can only exist if you can feel. Many of us, we were whipped by our parents, we were beat by bullies, all kinds of shit happens, right?
Yep.
And this, for most adults, is going to be the most uncomfortable thing and what keeps us stuck. And it's like the PhD, alpha level training, superhero thing to do. Like, you really want to do this because the results are fantastic. But it's scary as shit.
It's high risk, high reward in a sense.
Completely. You get to either be like the peak performing optimal human being or one that's kind of faking it and broken. And so the people that are really high functioning, got a high IQ, real smart, they can fake this really well and they can look very normal to people. But in general, they're going to be developing what I call a maladaptive survival strategy, which can be often called either psycho or sociopathology or narcissism.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
kind of a problem.
Narcissism, even that's quite interesting. Is that from a I can fool the others into whatever I want them to think I am doing?
Yeah, because in the kind of the rough idea of how narcissism develops in a person, one of the key components is you're raised in such a critically harsh environment that you're not allowed to develop a normal, healthy sense of self. So there's no self in yourself. There's an empty abyss, like a bottomless hole inside you,
Whoa.
which is eternally scary. So what do? You adapt. You create a false self that meets the expectations of the harsh environment you're being raised in. And you get really, really, really good at reading the room and the emotions and the feelings and the expectations of everything and everybody around you. So you become a chameleon, which, funny your podcast is called Chameleons.
I like to think I'm not a narcissist, but the name is there now.
Well, it can be very useful as a survival strategy, but again, it's got some real blind spots and bad things that can happen as a result of it to the person individually and to everybody they interact with. And so everything is a continuum from kind of like peak health to peak dysfunction, good and evil, you could call them, depending on your worldview, right or left, black or white. And there's a really fantastic book everybody should read to get a good idea of this. It's called People of the Lie.
People of the Lie.
Yeah, it was written by a famous author in America called Scott Peck. He wrote another really good book called The Road Less Traveled. And he was like a Navy psychiatrist. So a very mainstream sort of modern educated person. But he, at a certain age in his life, decided to become a Christian and decided to kind of look into that in a scientific way. And he became kind of curious. What is this whole thing about evil and Satan and this devil guy? What is this? And so, like a psychiatrist scientist, he decided to try to look at that and figure it out. And so he had, thousands of cases of patients over his career. And he started thinking and go, God, there was this one person, there was something going on with them. I couldn't figure it out. What the hell was it? And he eventually figured out that there was these examples that he remembered and could look at. And then he started studying and interviewing people like exorcists from the church and stuff like that. And he noticed and figured out, oh, these are people living for and defending a false reality and a false sense of self. And the more strongly they had developed that false reality and false sense of self, and the more strongly they were committed to defending its existence, the more they tended toward narcissism, sociopathology, psychopathology, and what traditionally, if you're running a religious framework or worldview, would be called evil.
Wow.
So again, really important things human beings might want to know.
Just out of curiosity, Chris, how was the essentially how did he define the false part of the analysis?
What do you mean you want to find the false sense of the?
So for the individual himself, he will think it's true because at least it's what he's defending.
Yeah.
But from the perspective of the analysis itself, how was it identified to be false?
Oh, okay. Yeah. For a psychiatrist studying a patient and working with them a lot, or growing up and living with somebody, you start to notice really easily that person keeps on saying things that are clearly a lie and not true.
Understood.
And you keep on trying to get them to see it, and they keep on avoiding it in ever more creative ways. Or they just kill you because they're not going to face the thing, and you continue to threaten them. And so that's why he called the book People of the Lie, because it was the habit of lying to maintain the false self that was he noticed and identified as the key indicator of the problem. And so the more, and obviously when you got 100 people observing somebody, it starts to become really easy for everybody to go, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. And the person keeps on thinking it is. And there was a famous criminal in America, and he formed a cult. And his cult eventually kidnapped somebody named Patty Hearst. And anyway, he ended up in prison because him and his cult members killed a lot of people. And I, for some reason, got lucky. And one day they televised one of his parole hearings on television. And I got to see this guy getting interviewed and talking to and answering questions from the parole board. And I was like, oh my God, they're asking him these questions and he never answers the question.
Deception at its best.
He was always defending his version of reality. And for whatever reason, it was super clear to me that that's what was going on. And so most people go, this guy's crazy. But he was really high functioning and his mental model was really well constructed. And so you could see how he was able to brainwash people that had a weak mind and not a good sense of self and stuff like that. So that was an extreme example. I forget his name at the moment, and the name of his cult, but he was very, very famous because Patty Hearst was the daughter of William Randolph Hearst, was a famous newspaper magazine mogul owner, super rich person. They built Hearst Castle in California. Anyway, I'll remember the guy's name eventually, but that's a really extreme, great example of somebody who really, really got damaged and had developed a really maladaptive survival strategy. And so another thing that's really important, when the frontal lobes fully grow out, that is essentially what I call the first time human beings get to be human. Another really important thing for all of us humans to know. And why I say it's the first time we get to become human is that if you're a scientist and you study humans and other species, you know that humans are called Homo sapiens sapiens.
Yes.
Right? Primates are Homo sapiens or something like that, right? They're primates, but they're not Homo sapiens sapiens.
A step before.
And everybody has, all the animals and insects and everybody have their own little Latin biological names, right? Their genome and their genealogy and all that. Anyway, Homo sapiens sapiens literally means the species that knows that they know.
The meta thinking.
Right. And so recently I saw that some smart guy figured out, oh, you know what, actually the highest or most valuable form of intelligence I think, is metacognition. So a key predeterminant to developing metacognition is the ability to know that you know. And that means developing a separate observer in yourself. So the frontal lobes grow out, and you start to have the capacity to develop the executive functions to manage emotions by seeing and noticing yourself. So if you develop that really well, which is a super great tool that Buddhism has called Vipassana meditation, it's essentially a meditation where you breathe very nicely and you just focus on your mind stream and all the thoughts that are coming through your head.
The
And you
alpha waves.
start noticing that, and you just get really good at noticing that thought and that thought and that thought. And then you go, well, where did that thought come from? And does that thought have a feeling connected to it? And it might be anxiousness in your stomach, right?
That
Or
physical feeling.
your foot is tingling, or you feel happy or afraid or whatever. Anyway, that is probably, I think, the preeminent, highest, best tool to developing a human being that's going to optimize and function really well in any business, in any school, in any family, in any science, etc. In fact, you can't do science well if you haven't developed a really healthy third-party observer function. Because what's one of the hallmarks of science?
It's thinking.
It's an independent observer observing an experiment without a pre-existing blocking expectation or set of beliefs. You have to be objective. You can't be subjective, right? That's the scientific method, is being objective. Well, once you understand this really well, you understand that almost no real science is done in humanity. It's very rare, because most often every experiment is filtered by the subjective expectation and thought processes of the scientific human being person that's running the experiment.
I was expecting to get that result. Oh, it worked. Awesome. Oh, it didn't work.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah. And so you see, if you look at the development of stages overlaid on all of the cultures in human history, you see that every culture had its own brand or fractal similar type of science. Like the shamans in the rainforest or Australia, wherever, if you ask them where did they learn how to combine this or this plant to make this or this medicine, they'll say something like, well, the plant told me. Like literally, this is documented. They've lots of ethnobotanists and others will say, yeah, this is what they told me, that the spirit of the plant told me. Well, the rational modern Western scientist is going to go, that's bullshit. No way. That didn't happen. We had to poke at it and tear it apart and look at it through an electron microscope. Because we're visual and cognitive, and we're not in that psychic, one with everything, connected to everything, and seeing and feeling energy developmental stage of being. They're both valid in their own way, and they both don't understand each other. And in fact, they'll attack each other because they don't understand each other. And so this is one of the last big important pieces I'll share. Up to the development of those frontal lobes and the third-party observer and the ability for metacognition, you are very strongly identified with and attached to one of the developmental stages. And that's super important for everybody in the human race to understand, because you identify with something and you attach to it.
You make it your identity, and you can think about your own identity.
Right. And so we said earlier that what's kind of the prime directive of all human beings? Survival.
Survival.
Okay, well, this goes back to there's real survival and there's egoic survival. because those are two separate things. There's survival in your mental model of what reality is and who you are. And who you are is who you've, a bunch of things, values, beliefs, things you've identified with, and eventually you attach to them. And you're like, this is me. And I'm going to fight to the death for this is me. And most people that study the world history understand that ideology has been the cause of more wars and death than anything else in the course of all human history.
You don't want to be wrong. You don't want to let your ego die.
Because it means you're not going to survive. And that survival is really, though, the survival of your idea and your identity that you're attached to. It has nothing to do if you have enough water, enough food to eat, enough shelter. You're going to survive if you have those things. Your body really survives,
But
right?
your mind.
Your ideology of whatever it is, Kant or Descartes or any other philosopher in history or the Bible or anything else, that doesn't matter really. You got enough air, water, and food, you're going to survive. All the other things are like wrapping paper of a Christmas present.
That's really fascinating because you embody that developmental stage as your identity.
Yeah.
So when you finally have your lobes fully formed, essentially, not in all cases, but I imagine in a high number of cases, you will need to make a choice between I was wrong, I need to almost let my old self die to rebuild from scratch.
Yeah.
Maybe a new group of friends, a new city, country,
yeah,
new beliefs, or
yeah,
continue as you were.
Yeah, exactly. So you got frontal lobes give you the capacity to develop metacognition from having an independent third-party observer that can be a bit more objective about observing things in reality. So if you're paying attention, you'll notice in yourself and in all cultures that everybody lives in a different developmental stage. And there's lots of researchers that study this stuff, and one group breaks them down into numbers. You can be in stage 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, 6. It goes up to 7 or 8. And the first stage you can kind of relate to early childhood. And it's feeling, you're living in your body. Eventually, you can develop into the what do people call it? Kind of the selfish baby that's screaming and crying if it doesn't get its milk, right?
It's what I want.
Right. And if somebody is an adult and they're stuck in that, they often end up in prison.
Maladaptive growth.
Only what they want and need in the moment matters. And usually people get stuck at a certain stage because they experienced a high-level trauma at that particular stage. Or they grew up in a culture that's at that stage, or they're in an environment of density of population that really encourages people staying at that stage. So stages 2, 2.5, those are like in the United States, it's easily like almost 50% of the population, maybe more. And that's the type of people that generally follow authority figures. They are very traditional, they follow the rules type of people. Then you jump, and they're very collectively oriented. They're very much, that humans are pack animals, collective type of thing. So very stable. Agriculture and agrarian culture really supports this developmental stage in a human being. Then you get 3 and 3.5, and that is where people switch to being more individualistic. And 3s tend to be the people that get PhDs and become experts in a field. But they don't really invent anything new. They just become an expert in the field of known knowledge and paradigms. And everybody in 2 and 2.5 follows those PhDs, and they go, oh, yes, you are the great authority figure. You know all. Right? And it could be a judge, a lawmaker, a professor, all those people, traditional institutions, right? Then you get 3.5, and in human developmental understanding, really important, everybody knows, that's the first time you really develop as a human being the ability to what's called self-author, which means you invent things that are not agreed to by the authority figures.
You go out and make something new.
Right, I have this idea, and entrepreneurship becomes a thing, right? And so you're inventing things and changing society, and until you're successful, everybody hates you and thinks you're crazy. But eventually they think, oh, you're the new god, yay, Steve Jobs and everybody else that became a famous entrepreneur, right?
Exactly. We love someone new to follow and give you answers.
Yeah. Then the next stage, you go 4, 4.5. That's where you go collective again. And each of the stages are kind of a reaction to the previous one. And one of the highlighted hallmarks of the fourth stage is everybody being valuable and equal. And so you get the inclusiveness, rainbow culture. We're not going to judge anybody. Everybody is equal and should have equal opportunity, and all of that sort of a primary culture. This developed really strongly in San Francisco, almost first to everywhere else in the world. High urban density kind of pushes this to happen. So that's a direct reaction to the 3.5 entrepreneurial, yuppie business, high meritocracy sort of a culture where, we're going to reward the smartest, fastest person and everybody else is garbage.
Yeah, it's almost that self-preservation kicks in of, for lack of a better word, the masses.
Yeah. So really strong tendency to go for socialism and community benefit, and we want to crush the asshole who thinks he's better than everybody else.
Oh, he's making too much money just for himself.
Yeah, right, which was previously was considered a good thing. So we have a very schizophrenic society and a bunch of people to a certain point, right? Then at 4.5, you get a little high, and you can almost think of these things as a human being living in a swamp, and they're just swimming in the water, in the mud, and eventually they're climbing up a tree, and they're getting a little higher and a little higher and a little higher and a little higher. And eventually you can see enough that you can start seeing, oh, wow, this exists and that exists and that exists and that exists, and that works really well in the water, and this works better over here, and this works better over here. So you can start seeing that there actually is a lot of value and sense to differentiation and maybe a hierarchy. And so it's the first time you can become a really good strategic thinker as a human being, to have this ability and to have that height of vision, you could say.
To look outside the quote-unquote rat race to see, there's actually a strategy to this race. There are different attributes in it at different points.
Yeah, and you can see that each level has its strategies, running its own sort of definition of a race, etc. And then the really big thing that everybody needs to know, and I'm going to do courses to train people in this, is you jump to stage 5. And why that's a big deal is because from 0 to 4.5 is what you can call the first tier or first level of stages. And those are all without the independent observer and the ability for metacognition. Up until 4.5, all human beings are primarily going to be identified to and attached to their stage. And everybody is an enemy of everybody else because they're identified and attached to their own level, and they don't understand the other level. And the other level is just considered a threat that they don't understand and makes no sense, and they should be doing what I'm doing.
Because I am right, they are wrong.
I am right, exactly. So once you get to this second level or second tier at 5, you can go, and this is kind of Neo in the Matrix. Wait, that's the machine world. and this is the real world. Anyway, you can really see that these are just a bunch of stages and everybody's doing all these things, but it's all just models in our head. And I wrote 68 pages on the matrix describing the symbolic meaning of each scene, because it really describes the development of the ego and the self and the relationship of one to the other.
I just have a question here, which is, so using numbers for it suggests a sequence, a progression.
Yeah.
In the real world, does a person actually go through them in a sequence? For example, if you get to stage 5, can you, or rather, if you get to stage 5, you can't go back to a previous stage? Or so is it always incremental? Or can you actually reverse in your level?
Super excellent question. Excellent question. So nature is an open system.
Mm-hmm.
And as an open system, it allows for variety.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it would be a closed system that follows one rule and one rule only.
One direction.
Right. What do we know about pretty much all closed systems? They kind of die
They kind of die.
after a while. So, to answer your question specifically, there's a definite sequence of human development, and there are what you can call anomalies, things that don't fit the pattern. And they can be for reasons for alternative evolution and development of an open system to invent and create new things.
A mutation, if you will.
Or it can be the result of trauma. So one example, when you have severe trauma at an early age, that ground fault interrupt switch I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
you can basically be forced into having what you can call an out-of-body experience. The trauma you're experiencing is so scary and so threatening, you literally, your consciousness leaves your body. Because there's no way you're going to feel all the stuff that this sensory machine, your body, is feeling at that moment.
Almost like a self-imposed coma.
Kinda, yeah. It's not a coma, but it's a self-imposed regulation and coping survival skill, because the body itself is undergoing like what would be a total short circuit of the system. It's like somebody just ran 50,000 volts through it and it's going, ah. So you're like, pop, I'm out. So that's often where a high functioning sociopath kind of develops.
They go out of the body and then come back?
Well, they've now developed the third party observer, but it doesn't feel because it's out of the body. So now it's really good at observing its environment, figuring out its strengths and its weaknesses of its targets, and how to manipulate and take advantage of them to survive. And it can't feel them, so it can kill them, hurt them, take from them, do whatever it wants, because it has no ability for empathy. And, you know, a smart researcher interviewed like 1,000 people on death row in American prisons. And a smart interviewer asked him, did you notice any common theme that these people had before they committed their act, whatever it was, you know, murder, rape, whatever? And he said, well, yeah, you know, I asked, and what I noticed was they all had lost the ability to feel. So, you know, warning, everybody, pay attention, human race. You must retain or regain your ability to feel if you want to be a fully functional, optimally operating human organism. So you were saying earlier, do people stay in one stage or another? Do they develop in, you know, an order, or they, anyway, So open system variety, you in general will go from one stage to the next, but from trauma and other things, you can jump to stages and go back and forth. Very common in adults. You can be 65 years old and you never get past stage 2 or 2.5 for a variety of reasons, right? The environment you grew up in, the society you grew in, the experiences you've had. Probably people are going to ask, how does this guy, Chris, know all this and how did he develop all this? And I'll tell you in a moment. So the most important thing, and in modern psychology, in the 80s and 90s, it became very popular to say, you must heal your inner child.
All right.
Right? You have an inner child in you. Get to know it, heal it, right? Yeah, that's your stage 1 to 2.
The
It's
being one with
inside you.
everything.
And it's a living memory in your body. And there's a great book by, I forget, he's a Danish or some Netherlands sort of psychologist, very famous now. He called The Body Keeps a Score.
Right.
Well, that's telling you the body is like a really advanced recording device, the whole neural system, and it's recording everything, and it's implanted in your subconscious. And when our children's state is in theta, we're in our subconscious, and we're basically just being programmed and absorbing all the data of behavior patterns, value structures, and beliefs that our environment, our parents are giving us from birth to the ages of 7 to 11. At a certain point, we switch into beta. We're not recording. Theta function is out. And we start just thinking on our own more. But most of our behavior is run by our subconscious programming all day long. So the really important task for all of us human beings, and where you get some real power and freedom as an adult, is to develop the third-party objective observer and metacognition to be able to see, and more importantly, feel all of the other stages of your own personal existence, from birth to childhood, late childhood, early adolescence, etc. And you then enliven and reinvigorate each of those so they can be a living, healthy, functional part of yourself. You can even say this should be a test, and no one should be elected as a politician or run anything of any consequence unless they've done this and developed this well.
And they
Because you have
feel.
to be able to have metacognition in both a mental and kinesthetic body feeling sense. Otherwise, very likely you're broken in one way or another, and you're going to have a detrimental blind spot that hurts either yourself, your family, your community, your society, or the species and everything that lives.
Wow. Because yeah, it's especially all this I guess it got emphasized more because of COVID, people being indoors, liking that potential human contact, that connection with others. And all this conversation about social media dumbing down people,
Yeah.
getting this synthesized with the world.
Yeah.
So in that way, we're just reversing, because we're losing that feeling, that sense of self, because you're just scrolling, you're just consuming. We
Yeah.
need to reconnect with all of that.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. So the way I explain how I developed in a way that I became a human person with a brain that discovered this stuff and thinks this way is so a variety of things. One is I was born in New York City to a mother who was from Colombia in South America and a father who was born in Pilsen in the Czech Republic, that had very different backgrounds. She was from aristocracy, people that were like presidents, congress people, senators, generals of the army, that came from royalty in Spain. The family has a castle in Spain, right? And my father came from a normal proletarian farm sort of family, right? Churning their own butter, milking the cows, right? Normal people. And I started traveling around the world from the time I was maybe 8 months old. And I was speaking Spanish and English and listening to and hearing German and Czech. So my brain was forced to live in and understand a variety of different worldviews and worlds through the different languages that were being spoken around me, which again, languages are models of understanding of reality. Like the German language, they got a whole bunch of descriptions and nouns, and eventually at the very end, they do the verb that determines the action.
First describe and then you explain what's going to happen.
Yeah, so they're thinking. Okay, now we'll act. Very different from other languages. Like in Spanish, objects are things with their own capacity to act, which to a modern Western American person is like nuts.
Yep, as a Portuguese, I confirm.
Yeah, Portuguese is the same. Arabic and other countries are the same, and they have a very common saying in Spanish, si Dios quiere, like God willing, which is inshallah in Arabic is God willing, right? And so there's this strange independent force that's going to determine your behavior. And a Western person is like, to hell with that shit. The will is what I'm going to do. It's my will that's going to determine what's going to happen.
Exactly.
Very different developmental stage and worldview. Yeah.
Chris, this was fantastic. And as you promised, you connected a lot of dots together here. So where can people find more about you? You know, you mentioned some courses, your ergonomics company. Where can people find more about it?
Sure. So if they want a chair that supports their optimal breathing and physiological function, and again, breathing is super important to develop good brainwave patterns and creativity and other things. They can go to somaergo.com, SOMAERGO.com.
Which will be in the description as well.
Yeah. And then the book will be out in about 90 days. And we're still settling on a title, so I can't describe that. People that are really, into geeking out about this stuff and want to see a very condensed academic paper, you can put a link to my paper that's on a university academic website. That paper, The Fractal Nature of Consciousness, the Evolution of the Global Human and the Driving Forces of History. And then they can look up my name. I'm Carl Christopher Zdenek, officially on LinkedIn, or Christopher Zdenek on Facebook. And they can follow me there. I'm going to start posting things related to all this. And like I said, I'm going to be offering courses to develop a variety of these things for optimal human performance and societal behavior, whether it's the development of objective third-party observer or metacognition, or to go from one stage to another and develop those stages or integrate all the stages. Or if you're a large scale, what's commonly termed an asset allocation manager. That means you kind of run things like you run, a giant corporation or a giant investment fund or a country, and you're deciding where these $1 trillion are going to go.
Very important.
It's really valuable to know this way of looking at the world, because you can make the best decisions possible by having a very healthfully developed third-party independent metacognition observer function. Without that, you can't make good decisions. And one of the most useful parts of my book that's coming out, I write letters to all the dominant institutions of the planet, which most of them, everybody, especially in America, knows they've been in a crisis. Whether it's healthcare or education or politics, economics, they've all been like crazy. Everybody's like, what the hell is going on? It's because they all developed and became successful on the developmental stage that has been dying. And the new developmental stage, and companies that are functioning on and embodying the new developmental stage have been replacing them. And as is common, the one wants to fight to the death to survive. But it's like a surfer trying to fight a 10-foot wave. It's stupid. You're going to get wiped out. Ride the wave that's there, and when it's done, then you ride the next wave. And that's exactly what I'm going to teach people how to become aware of, and what I describe in these letters to the dominant institutions of the planet. This is the wave that was existing, why you succeeded. This is the new wave, what's replacing you, why it exists, how you can adapt and succeed. And you'll see that it's not that one system completely dies. All the beneficial, positive things of each of the different stages get identified and included to create a integrated, more functional map and model and institutions that work better in every case for everything, whether it's medicine or economics or education or agriculture or anything. So people can look forward to that and learning about that. And I'll give talks and seminars, and most likely I'll end up becoming an advisor to heads of state and corporations, because super giant applications to investment and return on investment. In fact, the people that have executive teams that are second tier metacognitive in their thinking, they perform better and get a better return on investment. And this is actually a studied, scientifically proven thing. And the teams that have lower stage individuals don't perform as well. So we're going to offer and provide a testing service so people can see where they're at, and they can get trained to develop themselves one way or another. Yeah.
You get teams of a lot more A players rather than B or C players that need more supervision to get the same work done, and you need more of them to get the same results.
Yeah.
Fantastic, Chris. Thank you so much. It was a really fantastic talk, and maybe in the future we can speak again.
Yeah, great pleasure to talk with you. I've really enjoyed this a lot.
Thank you, Chris, and Happy New Year as well.
Yes, Happy New Year's to everybody. All right.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
All right. Bye-bye. Cheers.